Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we learn the Gemara Masechta Shabbos on Daf Daled Amud Aleph, Daf Daled Amud Beis, and Daf Hey Amud Aleph. Let's begin with a general outline of the Gemara. In the Mishnah, we learned the cases of Chtza and Achnasa as they were done by the Balabayas and the Ani. Here, the Gemara is going to ask, why is the individual chayav in each of these cases? It's necessary in order for a person to be chayav for the malacha of Chtza Achnasa. The akira and the anacha need to be from and to a place that's 4x4 tefachim. But in each of the cases of our Mishnah, either the hanacha or the akira was done from the hand of the other individual, and the hand of a person is not 4x4 tefachim. So why is there a chiyuv in the cases of our Mishnah? The structure of our Gemara is that there's going to be 5 answers that we're going to present. We're going to reject all 5 of those answers, and then we'll come to the final answer. Let's see the Gemara in the flowchart form. So in our Mishnah we mentioned the various cases where the Ani or the Balabayas is chayav for the malacha of Chtza or Achnasa. The Gemara asks, Amai chayav, why is the individual chayav in these cases? But we need an akira or anacha and anacha from and to an area that's 4x4 tefachim. So the Gemara begins with the first answer presented by Rabbah. Rabbah says, Hamani Rabbi Kiva. This is the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. The Savar that he holds, we don't need akir and anacha from and to a place that's 4x4 tefachim. So the reason our Mishnah says that the individual is chayiv is because our Mishnah follows an opinion that holds that it's not necessary to have an akira and an anacha from and to a place that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. Where does Rabbi Kiva say this? We have a teaching in a Mishnah that says that if an individual threw an object from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid through a Rishus HaRabim, so there's a machlekes. Rabbi Kiva says the person is chayiv, and the Chachamim say the person is pater. What are they arguing about? So the interpretation is as follows. Rabbi Kiva holds kluta kamisha hunchadamya. Rabbi Kiva holds kluta. When an item is contained in the ear of a certain rishos, kamisha hunchadamya, it's as if it's resting in that rishos. And therefore, when the item flew from the Rishus HaYachid, it went into the Rishus HaRabim, we say it's as if it's resting in the Rishus HaRabim. And therefore the individual is chayav for the malacha of Chtza. He carried out of the Rishus HaYachid into the Rishus HaRabim. But at any rate, we see that Rabbi Kiva holds that the very fact that it's resting already brings a chiyuv, even though it's not resting on an area that's 4x4. And therefore our Mishnah is based on the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. And the Chachamim say, we do not say when an item is kluta, it's contained, it's as if it's resting there. And since the item never rested in the Rishus HaRabim, therefore there's no chiyuv. Now the Gemara is going to digress. It's going to go to a side discussion for a moment before it comes back to the answer of Rabbah and explains why we don't accept it. The question is, was this clear to Rabbah that that's how we interpret the machlekes between Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim? When we look at the Mishnah, it says if somebody threw an item from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid through a Rishus HaRabim, we have a machlekes between Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim. We explain that the interpretation is that Rabbi Kiva holds kluta, kamisha hunchadamya, and the Chachamim say lo yamrin kluta, kamisha hunchadamya. We don't say kluta. So Gemara asks, "L'meimer the pshita leila Rabbah." Is it? You can tell me that it was clear to Rabbah, the bekluta kamisha hunchadami, that they're arguing about kluta. Vami baya baya leila Rabbah. This was actually a question to Rabbah. Rabbah, when he looked at the Mishnah, said that there's actually 2 ways of interpreting the machlekes between Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim, and only according to one of the ways does it come out that Rabbi Kiva is the author of the opinion, the source of the opinion that says we say kluta kamisha hunchadami. What are the 2 ways? What was the question of Rabbah? So one way of learning the machlekes is that the case is referring to an instance where the item flew through Rishus HaRabim. It all happened beneath 10 tefachim. And the machlekes is, do we say kluta? And since it's within 10 tefachim, it's still considered a Rishus HaRabim, because above 10 tefachim in Rishus HaRabim is a makim p'tor. So since it's a Rishus HaRabim, the hanacha would create a problem that the person did the malacha of Chtza. So is that what they're arguing about? Rabbi Kiva holds we say kluta, and therefore there's a chiyuv. And the Chachamim say we don't say kluta, and therefore there's no chiyuv. However, above 10 tefachim, there's no problem with kluta, because even if we say it's contained in the area, it's if it's resting there, above 10 tefachim is a makam p'tur, and it's mutter to carry from a Rishus HaYachid to a makam p'tur. So what would come out? That above 10 tefachim, everybody agrees he's pater for a different reason. Because we don't learn zeirik, lo yalfinan zeirik mi moishet. Let's explain that for a moment. In the Mishkan, the Levim would carry the beams from one wagon, they would pass the beams from one wagon to the next wagon along the same row. And it would pass over Rishus HaRabim. So in the Mishkan, the wagons were higher than 10 tefachim off the ground. So from there we learned that if an individual passes an item from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid through a Rishus HaRabim, and this all happened above 10 tefachim, he's going to be a chayav. So it would come out that over here, everybody agrees, lo yalfinan zerik from Meshit. We don't learn zerik from Meshit. If a person passed an item, then he'll be chayav, but not if he threw an item. So that's one way of looking at the Mishnah. They're arguing beneath 10 tefachim, but above 10 tefachim, everybody agrees that the person is pater. Or the other way of learning the Mishnah is that they're arguing above 10 tefachim. There are cases where the person threw the item from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah through a Rosh Hashanah, and it was all above 10 tefachim. And Rabbi Kiva says, Yalfinan Zerik Meshit. We learn Zerik from Meshit. Just like if he passed an item in such a way, he'd be chayiv. The same is true if he threw an item. And the Chachamim say, Lo Yalfinan Zerik Meshit. If a person passed an item, he's chayiv. However, if he threw it in such a manner, he's pater. However, below 10 tefachim, everybody agrees chayiv. My time, what's the reason? Because I'm reading Kluta Kamishon Chadamya. If the person would have thrown it from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah through Rosh Hashanah, all within 10 tefachim from the ground, then everybody would say he's chayiv because we say kluta. So how can we say that it was clear to Rabbah? The Rabbi Kiva is the one that says kluta when he actually had a question. Is it just Rabbi Kiva or is it also the Chachamim? So the Gemara answers, after he originally had a question, but after he had the question, afterwards it became clear to him that the interpretation is that Rabbi Kiva says kluta and the Chachamim don't say kluta. At any rate, we resolved that issue over there whether it was clear to Rabbah. Come back to the answer of Rabbah, which is that our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara rejects this answer and says that from there we only see that it's not necessary to have a hanacha on an area that's 4 by 4 tefachim, but we don't see anything about the akira. Why is that? Because Rabbi Akiva said if the person threw the item from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah through the Rosh Hashanah, he's chayiv. What is he chayiv? He's chayiv for the malacha of Eitzah. He carried from Rosh Hashanah into Rosh Hashanah. Since we say kluta k'mishon, it's like it's resting in the Rosh Hashanah. But Rabbi Akiva did not say that he's chayiv also for hachnasa. It went from the Rosh Hashanah into the Rosh Hashanah. From there we see that we don't have any indication that it's not necessary to have a kira from an area that's 4 by 4. Just the hanacha didn't have to be in an area that's 4 by 4. But we say have no information about that kira. So now we move on to the next answer in the Gemara, which is presented by Rav Yosef. And Rav Yosef says, Hamani Rebbe. Who does our Mishnah follow? It's the opinion of Rebbe. Rebbe is the one that says it's not necessary to have a kira and a hanacha from into a place that's 4 by 4 tefachim. And therefore in our Mishnah, even though in each case either the kira or the hanacha was from or to a place that's not 4 by 4 tefachim, the person is still chayiv because it's not necessary to have it. And it follows the opinion of Rebbe. So the Gemara rejects this answer of Rav Yosef and says, Hi Rebbe, which Rebbe is this? And that's the whole question. The Gemara is saying, which Rebbe is it? If you actually look into the various teachings of Rebbe, you'll find that there's two places where we could possibly interpret that Rebbe is telling us it's not necessary to have 4 by 4 tefachim for the akira and the hanacha. But if you look into these teachings, you'll find that Rebbe says no such thing. So it comes out that this is the whole question. Hi Rebbe, which Rebbe is it? If you look into the cases of Rebbe, you'll find that there's no such teaching from Rebbe. Let's see it for ourselves. If you'll say it's the teaching of Rebbe in a brisa, it says in a brisa that if an individual threw an item 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah, v'noch al ziz kol shehu, and it landed onto a very small protrusion of any size, even less than 4 by 4 tefachim, Rebbe says the person's pater, it's chayiv, and Chachamim say he's pater. So we see Rebbe says it's not necessary to have hanacha on an area that's 4 by 4, even if it rested on a small area, he's still chayiv. Says the Gemara, but we already explained that the way to learn this brisa is according to the teaching of Abaye. Abaye said that this is referring to a case where the item landed on a small ziz kolshehu, on a small area. It's referring to the branch of a tree. It was referring to a tree that was in Rosh Hashanah, and its branch was in Rosh Hashanah. And the machlekes between Rebbe and the Chachamim is that Rebbe says, Shadi neifei basari kare. We say, since this branch comes out of the tree, so just like the trunk of the tree has 4 by 4 tefachim, so it's considered that the branch has 4 by 4, because it comes out of the tree, which has 4 by 4. And therefore it comes out that actually there is a hanacha on an area that's 4 by 4. And the Rabbanan say, we don't say that the branch follows the trunk of the tree. The trunk is 4 by 4, however the branch doesn't, and therefore the hanacha was not an area that's 4 by 4. So we see clearly over here that Rebbe actually says that you do need a hanacha on an area that's 4 by 4. And the reason the individual is chayiv in that case is only because we say, Shadi neifei basari kare. So that teaching of Rebbe does not indicate that we don't need dalad al dalad for the akira and hanacha. So says the Gemara, rather, which Rebbe are you going to say? It's a different teaching of Rebbe. It says in a brisa that if an individual threw an item from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah through a Rosh Hashanah, so in this case the Rosh Hashanah was in between, again we have a machlekes between Rebbe and the Chachamim. Rebbe says the person is chayiv, and the Chachamim say he's pater. And here we have an extra teaching that will address a question we can ask, and that is a teaching from Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and he explained that when Rebbe said chayiv, he meant that the person is chayiv for two things. He's chayiv for haitzah and hachnasa. So when the item went through the Rishus Yachid, we say, oh, there's a Achnasa. Therefore, now the person has one Chiyuv. And then when it went from the Rishus Yachid and continued to the Rishus Rabbim, we have Eitzah. So clearly we see it's not necessary to have Dalad al Dalad, not for the Akira and not for the Hanacha. The Gemara explains that this won't either be a source that will work for our Mishnah, because both Rav and Shmuel already explained that when does Rebbe say his din, that the person is chayiv when it went through the Rishus Yachid, and he's chayiv for the Achnasa and the Eitzah, that's only if the Rishus Yachid was a Rishus Yachid Mekaira, if there was a roof on the Rishus Yachid. Because we say, Beisa Command Mal Yadami. We say it's as if the house, being that there's a roof, it's as if the house is full of items, and therefore the item came to the object that was thrown through the Rishus Yachid, it's as if it was resting on the items that the house was full of. And therefore it won't fit into our Mishnah where there's no roof. Now we would think to say, maybe we could answer that our Mishnah is referring to a case where the Balabais and Ani were standing under a roof. And therefore we say, Command the Mal Yadamya, it's as if it's filled with items, and therefore you have Hanach, says the Gemara. And if you'll say that here too there's a roof, says the Gemara, that won't work. That will work, that will work for the Balabais. We can say the Balabais is under a roof, but we can't say the Ani is under a roof, because if the Ani is under a roof, it's not anymore considered a Rishus HaRabim. It would be a Rishus HaYachid, since there was no such Rishus HaRabim in the Midbar. And therefore, when the Balabais carried from Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim, he wouldn't be chayiv, since it's not considered a Rishus HaRabim. So we find that there's no teaching from Rebbe where he says that it's not necessary to have Dalad al Dalad, and that we could fit it with our Mishnah. Gemara now continues on to the next answer. We make those two answers just disappear simply because there's not enough space. We'll bring up, we still kept the original two pieces of information, the Mishnah, the question. Then we had two sets of answers. We'll present now another two sets of answers. Here we have an answer from Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera says, Hamani Acherim, this is the opinion of Acherim, who say that it's not necessary to have Dalad al Dalad for the Akira and the Hanacha. Where do Acherim say this? We learned in a Braisa, it says that if somebody threw an item, Acherim say that if somebody threw an item 4 Amos and Rishus Rabbim, so there's one of the following things happen. If it fell into a person's hand, somebody was standing in one place and caught it, then the thrower is chayav. However, if the person who caught it ran to catch it, then the thrower is patur. So we have a case where a person threw an item and it landed. So if it landed into somebody else who was standing there and he stood in one place and it came to him, then the thrower is chayav for carrying Dalad Amos and Rishus Rabbim. However, if the individual who caught it ran to catch it, then the thrower is not chayav. Now let's look at the case where he's chayav. And we'll see how that shows us that we don't need hanacha on an area that's dalad al dalad. It says if he stood in one place and caught it, the individual who threw the item is chayiv. Why is he chayiv? There's no dalad al dalad. He caught it with his hand, as far as we understand. A person's hand is not dalad al dalad. We must say that it's not necessary to have dalad al dalad. So we could say that the opinion of Acherim, who say it's not necessary to have dalad al dalad, that's who our Mishnah conforms with. It conforms with that opinion. So the Gemara gives two answers. One answer is that once again, like we mentioned earlier, from there we only see that the Hanacha doesn't need Dalad al Dalad, but we have no information, we don't have a source that the Akira doesn't need Dalad al Dalad. And number two, we could say that it's referring to a case that the person stretched out his garment and caught the item. It doesn't say he caught it with his hand, so we could explain that he caught it with his garment, which was Dalad al Dalad. So we have no information not regarding the Akira and not regarding the Hanacha. Now the Gemara is going to present another three answers. The first two we're going to reject and we'll accept the final one. But these three answers are different than the previous three. In the previous three, we try to introduce opinions that say that it's not necessary to have Dalad al Dalad. Now we're going to present answers that say it is necessary to have Dalad al Dalad, and we have Dalad al Dalad in our Mishnah. So let's begin with the answer of Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba says that our Mishnah is referring to a case where both the Ani and the Balabayas were holding a basket. And since they were holding a basket, the Akira and Hanacha was done from the basket or into the basket, and the basket was Dalad al Dalad. So the Gemara asks, V'hayada katani, but it says in our Mishnah that he placed the item into the person's hand or removed it from the person's hand. It doesn't say basket. So the Gemara responds, Tani traskel shabayadei. Read into our Mishnah, change the words of our Mishnah, instead of saying yadei, read it to be traskel shabayadei. So that's the answer of Rabbi Abba, that we do have Dalad al Dalad in our Mishnah, since each individual was holding a basket. The Gemara now goes into a side discussion, that if we say that he's holding a basket, could this work with all opinions? Says the Gemara, this makes sense in Rishus HaYachid. We could say that the Balabayas was holding a basket. But in Rishus HaRabim, if the Ani is holding a basket, the basket has the status of a Rishus HaYachid, and therefore there won't be any chiyuv. Where do we see that it has the status of Rishus HaYachid? Again, the way the Gemara is formed, it says, so let us say, according to this, since we're saying that our Mishnah, he is chayiv, even when he carries into the into the basket of the ani, or from the basket of the ani, we need to say that our Mishnah doesn't fit with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda is the one who says that a basket in Rosh Hashanah is considered Rosh Hashanah. We learned in a brayso that says that if an individual Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda taught, if somebody put a pole in the Rosh Hashanah, and on top of the pole there was a basket, and another individual carried an item from Rosh Hashanah into that basket, that person did the malacha of achanasa and he's chayev. So we see that Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda holds that a basket in Rosh Hashanah receives the status of Rosh Hashanah. So do we have to say, according to this answer, it seems that our Mishnah doesn't follow the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, when the Balabayas carried the item from Rosh Hashanah into the basket of the ani in the Rosh Hashanah, he shouldn't be chayev. He carried from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara responds, it can actually fit also with Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda, because when did Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda say that a basket receives the status of Rosh Hashanah? It's only if the pole and the basket on top of it were above 10 tefachim, because by being above 10 tefachim, we now have walls that are 10 tefachim. We say the size of the basket, it's as if they extend to the ground, and therefore the basket has walls that are 10 tefachim high, because we know one of the conditions for Rosh Hashanah is that it has walls that are 10 tefachim. However, in our Mishnah, it's a case where the basket was below 10 tefachim. Since it doesn't have walls that are 10 tefachim high, it's not considered Rosh Hashanah, rather it will be a Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, according to this answer, it could fit with all opinions. So that's the answer of Rabbi Abba, that our Mishnah is referring to a case with individuals holding a basket. The Gemara has over here a question from Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo rejects this answer of Rabbi Abba and says, V'ha yadei katani. He remains with the first question that we had, that if we look at the text in the Mishnah, it doesn't say Traskul Shabi Yadei, that he was holding a basket. It says Yadei, just his hand. So now we'll move on to the answer of Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo then presents his own, after rejecting the answer of Rabbi Abba, presents his own answer. It says it's referring to a case where the individual lowered his hand within 3 tefachim of the ground. And when a person's hand is within 3 tefachim of the ground, there's a rule called lavud, that is, it's as if it's on the ground. And therefore we have both the akira and the anacha from and to a place that's dalet al dalet. So the Gemara asks, how could it be that his hand was near the ground if it says that both the ani and the balabayas were standing? If they're standing, their hand's not going to be 3 tefachim near the ground. So the Gemara gives 3 answers. One is, it's referring to a case where he bent over, he was leaning. A second answer is that the person was standing in a ditch. So the ditch was deep into the ground. He was standing in that pit, and if he put his hand onto the ground, it was within 3 tefachim of the ground. And the third answer is that the individual in our Mishnah, both the ani and the balabayas, both individuals were midgets, and therefore their hand was able to be within 3 tefachim of the ground. And now we have dalet al dalet for the akira and the anacha. Rava asks on this answer and says, did the Tana trouble himself so much, teach all the cases of the ani, of the balabayas, haitzah, achnasa, the chiyuv cases and the pater cases, for these limited, very out of the ordinary cases of an individual that's leaning over, or an individual that's standing in a pit and a midget? It makes no sense that a Tana went so much out of his way to teach all the cases of haitzah and achnasa, the cases of chiyuv and the cases of pater, for these very limited, out of the ordinary cases. And therefore Rava says that this is not a good answer. And here we present the final answer, the answer of Rava. Rava says, Yadei shel adam chashuv lei kedalet al dalet. The reason we have dalet al dalet in our Mishnah is because a person's hand is important to him, and it has the significance of an area that's 4x4. And therefore, when the akira was done from the hand, or to the hand, it's considered being done and from an area that's 4x4, 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. The Gemara now presents a support to this teaching. We also, Rabbi Yochanan taught the same thing, that Yadei shel adam chashuv lei kedalet al dalet. The hand of a person is important to him, is significant to him, as if, like an area that's 4x4 tefachim. And the simple explanation is that the akira and anacha is done from an area that's 4x4 because that's considered an item that's fully at rest. That's where a person puts things down. That's considered an area that something is properly at rest with him. A person's hand has that same importance. People put things in their hand and they consider it safe and fully and properly at rest. Now the Gemara goes to the last piece, which is basically a side discussion to this, which is we have another teaching from Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan taught that if somebody threw an object and it landed in another person's hand and that person stood in one place, and here it said clearly it landed in his hand, and that in such a case the thrower is chayev. So the Gemara asks, what's Rabbi Yochanan teaching us here? What's his chiddush? Is he teaching us that it's not that a person's hand is considered 4x4? But he already taught it once, and he actually said it clearly. He said Yadei shel adam chashuv lei kedalet al dalet. It's important to him like it's 4x4. So obviously, if somebody threw an object and it landed in another's hand, he's going to be chayev. And the Gemara answers that you might think that the only time we say that a person's hand is dalit al dalit when he gives significance to the hand. So if a person does an akira from another's hand, or he does a hanacha into a hand, he clearly gave significance, he gave importance to the hand, then we say it's dalit al dalit. But in the case where an individual threw an item, he had no idea where it's going to land, and it ended up landing in another person's hand, in that case he didn't give importance to the other's hand, maybe then we don't say that it has importance of dalit al dalit and is considered dalit al dalit. Kamashim Lon, it comes to teach us that it does, that a person's hand is dalit al dalit. It's not dependent on the individual thinking in that case, the hand is important to me. But rather, since a person's hand has general importance, it's considered dalit al dalit in all cases.